No one in the courtroom expected what happened next. The morning session had been quiet, routine even, parking tickets, late fees, small infractions, but the moment she walked in, the atmosphere shifted. A tall young woman in a sheriff's department jacket strode through the doors with a confidence that didn't match the nervous crackle in the air. Her boots echoed like someone who believed rules belonged to others, not her. People turned their heads, whispering, sensing something off before a single word was spoken. Judge Frank Caprio looked up from his bench, studying her calm but wary. He had seen thousands of cases, countless faces, but every now and then, one entered the courtroom that carried a storm behind their eyes. And this woman, she carried something heavy, something hidden, something the courtroom was about to feel. Her name was Lydia Harper, 26 years old, charged with interference with a traffic stop, plus an outstanding failure to appear. On paper, it looked straightforward, the kind of situation where someone tried to talk their way out of trouble and made it worse. But the officers who processed the report had left unusual notes, phrases like high emotional agitation, unusual insistence, and claimed authority not hers. Something about that bothered Judge Caprio. The courtroom itself felt unusually still as Lydia approached the defendant's table. A few people leaned in. A middle-aged man in the back cleared his throat nervously. Even the clerk paused longer than usual before announcing, "State of Rhode Island versus Lydia Harper." Lydia didn't sit right away. She glanced around the room as if searching for someone, or hiding from someone. A flicker of fear passed across her expression before she caught herself and forced a straight posture. Judge Caprio noticed every detail. "What brings a sheriff's daughter into my courtroom with charges like these?" he wondered silently. "And what weight is she carrying that she's trying so hard to hide?" Judge Caprio leaned forward, speaking with his signature calm warmth, steady, unhurried, and deeply human. "Good morning, Miss Harper." His tone wasn't accusatory. It wasn't indulgent either. It was the voice of a man who believed every person deserved to be understood before they were judged. Lydia nodded once. "Good morning, Your Honor." Her voice was steady, but her fingers trembled against the table. In his decades on the bench, Judge Caprio had learned to read people. The way some defended themselves with anger, others with silence, others by pretending nothing was wrong. Lydia Harper was doing none of those. She looked like someone bracing for an impact she'd already felt before. He studied the file again. Sheriff Harper, her father, was well known in the city. Strict, respected, a man who lived by protocol like it was scripture. Judge Caprio exhaled slowly. "This case is not going to be as simple as it appears." "Ms. Harper," he began gently, "you're charged with interfering in a lawful traffic stop and failing to appear on your scheduled court date. Before we proceed, is there anything you'd like me to know?" There it was, the invitation he always gave, not to excuse, but to humanize. Lydia swallowed hard. "Your Honor, it's not what it looks like." Her voice cracked, not dramatically, just enough to betray emotion she didn't intend to show. Judge Caprio nodded slowly. "Tell me what it is, then." Her eyes flickered toward the back of the courtroom again, that same anxious searching. And instead of answering, she finally sat down. There was a long pause before she spoke again, quieter this time. "My father is Sheriff Thomas Harper." A murmur rustled across the courtroom. Everyone knew the name. Lydia took a shaky breath. "The night of the traffic stop. I wasn't trying to cause trouble. I wasn't trying to interfere. I just—" She paused, pressing her lips together as if holding back a storm. "I thought I could handle it. I thought I could keep it from becoming a bigger problem." Judge Caprio watched her carefully. "Why did you think that?" Lydia hesitated. Her foot tapped nervously. Her eyes darted again to the back. Then she said something that made the judge sit straighter. "Because the person being stopped was my younger brother." The room fell silent. Judge Caprio's voice softened. "Your brother was the driver?" "Yes." Lydia's voice trembled now. 17 years old. Scared. "My father. He would have—" She cut herself off, looking down. The judge could sense the weight behind that sentence, a weight born in a household where law wasn't just enforced, it was enforced harshly. "What happened during the stop?" he asked. Lydia inhaled shakily. "My brother called me. He was in tears. The officer said he was speeding, really speeding, and that he'd be taken in. My brother panics easily, Your Honor. He's not like my father. He's gentle, sensitive. And I knew that if Dad found out it would be—" She faltered again. "Bad. Really bad. So you went to the scene?" "Yes." Her eyes glistened. "I told the officer I was with the sheriff's department, that I could take responsibility. I wasn't trying to override anything, I promise. Her voice cracked again. "I just needed to get him out of there before my father got to him." A mix of reactions rippled through the courtroom. Surprise, sympathy, judgment, confusion. Judge Caprio remained calm, steady. "Ms. Harper, the officer reported that you insisted he had no right to detain your brother." "I know," she whispered. "I panicked, too. I didn't mean to disrespect him. I was just scared for my brother." "What were you afraid would happen?" the judge asked quietly. Lydia's face tightened. She bit her lip. Her eyes fell to the table as tears finally slid down her cheeks. "My father doesn't tolerate mistakes," she said. "And my brother, he's suffered enough under him." A hush spread over the courtroom. Judge Caprio felt a familiar ache twist in his chest. Behind Lydia's interference, behind her defiance, behind her supposed misbehavior, was fear. Pure, protective fear. But then came the part no one expected. Slowly, the middle-aged man in the back, the one Lydia kept glancing at, stood up. Sheriff Thomas Harper, his uniform immaculate, his jaw clenched, his eyes locked onto his daughter like steel. The courtroom tensed. Even the air felt sharp. Lydia froze. Judge Caprio turned his head slightly. He didn't need an introduction. He knew exactly who the man was. The sheriff stepped forward, voice stiff, controlled. "Your Honor, may I address the court?" Lydia's eyes widened in fear. Judge Caprio lifted a hand gently. "You may wait until I ask for input, Sheriff." The sheriff's jaw tightened. His nostrils flared, but he obeyed. Judge Caprio turned back to Lydia, his voice low and protective. "Ms. Harper, is there more you want to tell me?" Her breath shook. Her hand gripped the table. Then, in a whisper, "He followed me here." A wave of whispers rippled through the courtroom. Lydia's hands trembled violently now. "He told me this morning that if I embarrassed the department again, I'd regret it." Judge Caprio felt something tighten inside his chest, an old, familiar anger at the misuse of authority. He turned, eyes sharp, to Sheriff Harper, but he didn't speak. Not yet. He wanted to hear the full truth. He looked back to Lydia. "Ms. Harper, did your father pressure you not to appear in court for your initial date?" Her silence lasted several seconds. Then, "Yes, Your Honor." Another gasp rolled through the room. Judge Caprio leaned back, absorbing the weight of what she'd just confessed. This case was no longer about a traffic stop. It was about fear, control, family, and the quiet courage of someone trying to protect a brother, and herself. The courtroom had shifted from curiosity to a heavy, palpable tension, one that felt as if a single wrong word might split the room open. Judge Caprio clasped his hands together slowly. His voice, however, remained steady, always steady. "Ms. Harper," he said gently, "you're safe here. Take your time." Lydia swallowed hard, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She wasn't looking at the judge anymore. She was staring down at the wood grain of the table as if anchoring herself to something solid. The courtroom waited in near silence. Then she whispered, "I didn't come here today to defend myself." Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly. "Then why did you come?" Lydia's tears finally broke free. Not loud sobs, but a quiet, painful release that felt years overdue. "Because I need someone." She paused, her voice cracking. "Someone with actual authority. To tell my father to stop." A collective breath caught in the room. Sheriff Harper stiffened, but he didn't move. Not yet. Judge Caprio's eyes deepened with something heavy and reflective. "This isn't a case," he thought. "This is a cry for protection disguised as a legal proceeding." He turned his attention calmly to the sheriff. "Sheriff Harper," he said, "please remain where you are. I will give you your turn shortly." The sheriff's jaw flexed, but he remained still. Judge Caprio faced Lydia again. "Ms. Harper, I need you to explain." She wiped her cheeks, her voice trembling as she tried to steady it. "I grew up in a house where fear was normal," she began softly. "People think being the sheriff's daughter means privilege. It doesn't. It means expectations, rules, consequences." She looked up at the judge, and for the first time, her expression held no mask, no shield, just raw humanity. "My father is respected by everyone in this city, except his own children." Gasps whispered across the room like wind. Lydia took a shaky breath. "When my brother got pulled over, I knew what would happen if the officer called my father. My brother has panic attacks. He struggles with anxiety. But my father sees that as weakness." She shook her head. "He calls it defiance." Judge Caprio's face softened with sorrow. "Go on." Lydia continued, each sentence sounding like a weight lifted and simultaneously a wound reopened. "Last year, my brother forgot to lock the garage. My father grounded him for a month and made him sleep on the floor. When he got a C in math, my father made him run laps after school until he threw up." A woman sitting in the second row covered her mouth. Judge Caprio felt something deep inside him twist painfully. He had seen harsh households. He had seen fear in children who learned early that love came with conditions. But hearing this from a young woman who was shaking, terrified yet brave enough to speak, it hit harder. Lydia's voice quivered. "I didn't interfere to be above the law. I interfered because I knew the moment the officer called him, my brother's life would get worse." She paused, swallowing hard. "Everything I did was wrong, legally. I know that. But I just wanted to protect him from—" She didn't finish. She didn't need to. The sheriff finally stepped forward a single step. "Your Honor, my daughter is exaggerating." Judge Caprio lifted a hand, firm, unshakable. "Sheriff Harper, sit down." It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, it was absolute. The sheriff froze, stunned at the sharpness beneath the calm tone. After a long moment, he sat. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Lydia wiped her eyes again, her hands trembling. "That night," she continued, "I tried to convince the officer to let me handle it, not because I wanted to override him. I was desperate. I said things I shouldn't have. I probably sounded like I was ordering him." Judge Caprio nodded slowly. "And the failure to appear?" Lydia lowered her gaze. "My father told me not to come. He said he'd take care of it. But that always means one thing. He'd make someone pay, usually us." She exhaled shakily. "The morning of the appointment, he blocked my car in the driveway, told me I wasn't going anywhere, that I didn't need a court, that he would decide the consequences." Another wave of murmurs filled the courtroom. This time, Judge Caprio didn't let them linger. He raised his hand once, and silence returned. "Judge Caprio. Ms. Harper, do you fear retaliation for appearing today?" Lydia hesitated only a moment before whispering, "Yes." The sheriff shifted in his seat. His expression darkened. Judge Caprio's voice remained calm, but his eyes sharpened like steel. "Sheriff Harper, do you dispute your daughter's account?" The sheriff stood tall, his presence commanding, voice tight with barely contained anger. "Your Honor, my daughter is emotional, soft. She always has been. She dramatizes things. I run my household with discipline, something this generation lacks." A disapproving murmur rolled across the courtroom, heavier than before. Judge Caprio tilted his head ever so slightly. "Discipline," he repeated quietly. "Is that what you call what she just described?" Sheriff Harper bristled. "I enforce the standards my children need to succeed. I don't coddle them." Lydia closed her eyes, flinching at the word coddle. Judge Caprio regarded the sheriff with a long, thoughtful silence. Then he turned back to Lydia. "Miss Harper, what do you want from this court today?" Her answer came without hesitation. "A chance, Your Honor." He leaned forward. "A chance for what?" Lydia's breath hitched, her voice broke. "A chance to stop being afraid." The courtroom fell completely, achingly silent. She continued, her voice soft but steadying. "A chance for my brother to feel safe. A chance to do the right thing without being punished for it." She shook her head, tears falling freely now. "I don't expect you to erase the charges. I need someone to see what's happening, someone he can't control." Judge Caprio inhaled deeply. He felt the weight of her plea. He felt the eyes of the courtroom watching him, waiting for a wise, fair, compassionate response. He had carried the robe for decades. He had seen justice twist under the weight of power, and he had vowed to never let fear rule his courtroom. He looked into Lydia's eyes, and he said softly, "I see you." Lydia covered her mouth, overwhelmed. Judge Caprio lifted the case file again, and then closed it gently. He didn't need it anymore. Instead, he spoke to Lydia in a quiet, reflective tone. "Miss Harper, when the law conflicts with fear, we must seek truth. When authority is used to harm, we must protect those who cannot speak for themselves." He paused, then shifted his gaze to the sheriff. "And when someone tries to use their position to intimidate the court—" The sheriff straightened stiffly. "I do not take it lightly." The air tightened. The tension reached its peak. Judge Caprio looked back at Lydia. "Your courage today is greater than your mistake." Her eyes widened, filling with fresh tears. Behind her, someone quietly whispered, "God bless her." Judge Caprio continued, "But before I make my ruling, I need to know the truth of one thing." He leaned forward just slightly. "Were you acting out of entitlement or out of protection?" Lydia's chin trembled. "Protection, Your Honor. Always protection." He nodded once, slow, knowing, certain. For a moment, the judge said nothing, but inside his thoughts moved with the gravity of decades of experience. "I have seen children punished for being human. I have seen parents use fear instead of guidance. I have seen authority twisted into a weapon instead of a responsibility." He looked at Lydia, a young woman who had walked into this courtroom shaking, terrified of the man sitting behind her, a daughter who had learned early that silence was safer than truth. And today, he thought, she chose truth anyway. He exhaled quietly. Justice is not blind to suffering. It should never be. The courtroom waited, silent, tense, expectant, as Judge Caprio slowly removed his glasses and placed them gently on the bench. It was a gesture he made only when the weight of a case pressed deeper than the pages in front of him. He looked at Lydia, then at her father, then at the courtroom full of strangers who suddenly felt like witnesses to a moment far bigger than a simple traffic case. Finally, he spoke. "Miss Harper, I appreciate your honesty and your courage." Lydia's eyes glistened, but she held herself still, bracing for whatever came next. Judge Caprio continued in a calm, steady tone. Not everyone who stands before this bench understands accountability. But you do. You've taken responsibility for what you did. You've acknowledged your mistakes. And you've done so under pressure most people in this courtroom will never understand. He paused to let that settle. Before I deliver my decision, I'm going to ask your father one final question. The sheriff straightened, smoothing the front of his uniform as though preparing to reclaim control of the narrative. Judge Caprio turned to him. Sheriff Harper, did you instruct your daughter not to appear in court on her scheduled date? A tense beat passed. The sheriff stared back defiantly. I told her I would handle it. That's not what I asked, Judge Caprio replied, the calmness razor-sharp. Did you tell her not to appear? The sheriff's lips pressed into a thin line. I told her she didn't need to come. Another beat. Judge Caprio nodded slowly. In other words, you interfered with a lawful court process. A wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom. The sheriff's face flushed. I was trying to protect my family's reputation. Judge Caprio held up a hand. This courtroom does not exist to protect reputations, he said firmly. It exists to protect truth. The sheriff fell silent, jaw working furiously. Judge Caprio turned back to Lydia. Ms. Harper, please stand. She rose slowly, wiping her palms on her slacks, her hands trembling uncontrollably. For a long moment, Judge Caprio simply looked at her. Then he spoke with compassion layered beneath the authority of the bench. Your interference at the traffic stop was a mistake, a serious one. But mistakes made in fear, mistakes made in protection, mistakes made in desperation. Those are not the same as mistakes made in arrogance. Lydia swallowed, tears sliding down her cheeks. You did not use your father's position for personal gain, Judge Caprio said. You used it, to your own detriment, to shield someone who could not shield himself. A small sob escaped her. Judge Caprio continued. The charge of interference with a traffic stop is dismissed. A collective gasp echoed through the room. Lydia covered her mouth in disbelief. The failure to appear charge, he continued, will also be dismissed on the grounds that there is credible evidence you faced intimidation preventing you from appearing. Lydia's knees buckled slightly and she held onto the table for support. Judge Caprio raised a finger, firm yet gentle. But hear me clearly. This dismissal is not an approval of what happened. It is a recognition that justice must sometimes look deeper than the surface. He leaned forward. Your heart was in the right place. Your actions were not. But you have shown remorse, accountability, and extraordinary courage. This court will not punish you for surviving under fear. Her tears flowed freely now. The judge straightened, turning toward Sheriff Harper. His voice transformed, still calm but imbued with unmistakable authority. Sheriff Harper, please rise. The sheriff stiffened, standing rigidly. Judge Caprio fixed him with a gaze that pierced through the uniform, through the authority, and straight into the core of the man. Your daughter did not come here today for leniency. She came here for safety. The sheriff's mouth twitched. Your position grants you power, but power without empathy becomes cruelty, and cruelty under the roof of one's own home is the worst kind of betrayal. A shocked silence fell over the courtroom. Judge Caprio continued. You are a sheriff. You enforce the law. But the law does not give you ownership of the people in your family. It does not give you permission to rule through fear. Lydia sobbed softly behind her hands. The sheriff's face drained slightly of color. If you attempt to intimidate your daughter or any member of your family regarding today's proceedings, Judge Caprio said slowly, I will ensure the full authority of this court addresses it immediately. He let the weight of that sink in. Is that understood? The sheriff clenched his jaw. His pride waged a silent war with reality. After several painful seconds, he forced out the word. Understood. Judge Caprio nodded once. Good. He turned back to Lydia. Miss Harper, you are free to go, and you have nothing to fear in this courtroom. Lydia collapsed into her seat, sobbing with relief. Her shoulders shook with years of held-in fear finally breaking loose. A woman in the back cried quietly. A man whispered, "Bless that judge." Even the clerk discreetly wiped her eyes. Lydia looked up at the judge through tears. "Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you so much." Judge Caprio offered her a soft, fatherly smile, one filled with warmth, reassurance, and a depth that came from decades of understanding human fragility. "Take care of your brother," he said gently, "and take care of yourself." She nodded, unable to speak. As Lydia walked out of the courtroom, her steps unsteady but finally free of the shadow that had followed her in, Judge Caprio watched her with a quiet sense of hope. He knew she still had a long road ahead. Healing from fear was not a verdict, it was a journey. But today she had taken the first step. The courtroom slowly emptied, but the echoes of the moment lingered. Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair, reflecting not on the charges, not on the procedures, but on something deeper. Sometimes the law is not about punishment, he thought. Sometimes it is about giving someone the strength to stand again. He folded his hands gently. Justice is not the rigidity of rules. It's the courage to see the human being behind them. As he prepared for the next case, he whispered softly to himself, words he had lived by his entire career. Compassion is not weakness. It is the highest form of strength. And the courtroom door closed behind Lydia Harper, a young woman who arrived trembling, and walked out finally, blessedly, unafraid.